We are the One Story Podcast. We believe in the power of a story. Everyone has a story, and that story is meaningful. Your story can make a difference. Your story can inspire others. Your story is important. At the same time, ultimately, everyone's story is a part of one story, the big God story.
It's not what you said. You're not who you said you were. When are you alone? When will you come back home?
Hey fam, we're back with the One Story Podcast. My name is Drew, and I'm with my friend Isaac. I always wait for you to throw your name in there, man.
Hold on.
Want you to do it.
Did you forget my name?
I didn't have it written down this time. Hey, everyone.
I don't know if I like fam.
No?
I don't know.
like the fam. It's the One Story family. We're all a part of it.
I like something needs to be more hardcore.
Well, we'll figure it out.
Like
we'll
One Story
work on it.
Gangsters, One Story Cholos.
No.
Oh, come on.
That's not going to work. Sorry.
One Story Killers.
You identify as a cholo.
That on the mic is Mr. George Calasa, my Uncle George. Say hi.
Hello.
It's the G Unit's up in the house.
There you go.
Mr. Calasa. Yeah, so thanks for coming back with us, listening to another episode. This is episode 20. Big, what do you call them? Landmark episode. I don't know if that's the right word. But anyways, episode 20.
With Guernsey's, it was a landmark.
10. That was double digit.
Sorry,
I didn't use
10
that.
episodes?
I didn't use that word because I don't think that's appropriate in the sense of landmark. But this is a highlight episode.
No, this is a place where come visit via digital space.
Take a left turn once you hit the One Story Podcast. So, I think we can get right into this unless, Isaac, you have something to say.
Well, I mean, just always thankful for everybody that's listening.
Yeah, indeed.
Again, I just want to thank everybody that supports this and all the feedback that we get. It's, all the positive stuff that people say. It's very encouraging. Keep on sending us praises. I need it. It keeps me going.
Yeah. And to that point, like really, we say it all the time. Please reach out to us. Let us know who you are, where you're listening from. Just drop us a quick line to interact with you. We'll start this community or family, One Story fam.
All right, I like it.
No.
I mean, but we all have to get matching tattoos. That's only.
We're still working on the design, I think. We'll have it out pretty soon.
And again, I just want to thank our wives for just giving up their time with us.
Amen.
For us to be here because it can be hard. I know my wife's at home with 3 kids being tortured, so keep it up, kids.
Home with 1. Yeah, and thanks to the wives and the family as a whole, who are sacrificing for us to be here. So we can't thank that enough. But without further ado, let's jump in and listen to what Mr. George has to say here, Uncle George.
All right.
Well, actually, before we kick it off,
Sure.
I got one hard-hitting question for you to kick this off.
Starting it off hot.
Did Rian Johnson completely ruin the Star Wars saga? What is your take on The Last Jedi?
Ooh, that is a tough one. There was definitely some upset regarding a few plot points that lots of people were paying attention to, and they seem to have been disposed of. I'm hoping that...
can there be redemption in episode 9?
If anybody can do it, JJ can.
Hold on.
What?
Dude, I love that. The Last Jedi was legit.
Did you?
Of course.
I mean, it was a good movie, but the more I watch it,
Right.
and like we bought the DVD and we have the special features.
What is
stuff.
it? The controversy about Luke, right? Is that what you're talking about?
There's that, and then plot lines.
Like what? I must be out on the owl. I don't know. For me, I'm the best movie critic because
you love everything.
I love all movies. I can see the worst movies. It was funny. I was talking to my buddy Gilbert, and he was like, "Oh, me too. I love all movies." I was like, "Oh, what do you think about the new Power Rangers movie?" He goes like, "What?" he's like, "I'm not gonna watch that." I'm like, "Oh, you're not a real
movie lover."
Yeah.
Real fan.
But yeah, I mean, it was a good movie, but just I don't know.
Okay,
some stuff doesn't sit well.
Give me. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
I actually did like the movie. No, but the plot points that I was referring to was actually Rey's lineage which they essentially said, oh, well, she came from nothing, which, could end up actually being a lie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
that's not set in stone.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the origin of Snoke.
Yeah, who is Snoke?
And then, all of a sudden, he seemed to actually go away pretty quickly.
Yeah. And then when you make a movie and you're the director and writer and everything, you make the decisions, and then some people don't like what was done with Luke,
I don't know. I thought that was dope. I know.
Well, just his attitude and like where he got to on that island when Luke for the whole, 4, 5, and 6, like he represented hope and optimism.
Yeah.
And then he's this
came all emo.
He was very beaten down by circumstances.
He was
just
beaten
wearing
down.
the hair in front of the eyes.
And some people say, well, he was like Obi-Wan, where Obi-Wan was on Tatooine. But if you think about it, he was there kind of watching over Luke. And then once he was called, once R2, showed, sorry, we're geeking out here on Star Wars. But once that happened, he was like, yeah, let's go. And Luke, you're coming with me. Where
right
on The Last Jedi, it was a little different for Luke. So that's where I take... I didn't enjoy that. But overall, it's a good movie, and we get to watch more Star Wars, so all's good.
You guys are lame. That movie is awesome.
I bought the movie. Does any help?
Yeah, I know. I bought it too. So anyways, after that really important point that we needed to get across.
Actually, that was a show today. Thanks, George, for having you in. And
with who else other than me and maybe your brother?
Exactly.
You gotta do that.
Star Wars talk.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were into Star Wars, Drew.
Yeah.
I thought you were too serious for anything like that, for fantasy.
No, I'm a dork. Lord of the Rings. I read the books, love the
Lord of the
movies,
Rings
and
that's good.
Star Wars. Yeah, all that stuff.
And a different side of you I've never seen.
I
I thought you were
like to keep it that way.
You're like nonfiction only.
Well, yeah. So, anyways, let's jump in.
I went to Utah to watch a Star Wars movie with this guy.
That's right.
Oh,
the
wow.
Megaplex.
What a
Yeah,
good
the
uncle.
Megaplex.
Where you can only watch movies.
The legendary Megaplex. It's like your Aunt Jean will like that one.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Long-time listener, first-time guest, right? No, but actually, so I'll just talk a little bit about how I got here because I'd seen you put out the message that you wanted people to email you to see if they wanted to come on the show, that kind of thing. And in my mind, I was thinking, if it's meant to be, I think I would probably wait to get invited, like that kind of thing. And I guess God said, well, okay. And as I was listening to one of the episodes on my way home from work, Drew calls me. Jerry,
nice.
So that was a little surreal,
Yeah,
For sure.
Then the guy that you're listening to just calls on the phone. Hey,
the radio station's calling you. No, but and then he invited me on the show. I was like, well, it was just kind of a surreal experience, but very, very cool, and it's an honor, really.
Oh, no,
thank you.
Thank you for being here.
And if you're out there listening, don't wait.
Yeah.
Email us.
We don't have your number.
We don't have all your numbers.
All right, there you go.
No, yeah, it's good.
Very good point. No, so I guess we'll start at the beginning. We had talked a little bit before the show about my heritage. So
I'm going to throw you off already. Anybody ever tell you look like Stephen Baldwin?
that is one I haven't heard yet.
Really?
I've heard a few others, but yeah.
Stephen Baldwin.
The Baldwin brother,
I guess.
in the house today.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's talk about Baldwin movies. Biodome. That's a good one.
The greats, right?
One of the
Cult
classics.
All right, God bless Stephen Baldwin. Anyway,
He's a Christian, right? I think
Yeah.
He might be, actually.
I think he's like. I think he actually has a podcast where.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with some theologian that
He's doing something, some documentary thing. I heard him on the Bad Christian podcast, I think.
Oh, really? They had him
yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Those guys are lame.
Well,
Anywho,
yeah.
to
So
each his own.
my parents came from different parts of the world. My father was of Portuguese descent from Hawaii, and my mother was from Ireland, and they actually met in Spain. My dad was in the Navy. He was stationed there, and my mother and a friend of hers were on their holidays there, and that's actually how they met.
The U.S. Navy?
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I ended up coming to Oxnard because it had been one of my dad's previous duty stations there in Hueneme.
Right.
And he liked the area, and he wanted to set up, a house there and a family. So my parents, they married, and then she immediately went to Hawaii where, I was born. And
So you were born in Hawaii.
I was born in Hawaii. I think there was a short stint in Puerto Rico, and then I lived in Oxnard since pretty much age 1.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I have one sister who was actually born in Oxnard, so we've been in Ventura County most of our lives.
Okay.
My childhood, it wasn't the worst childhood, but it was, I did have a few setbacks. I suffered some physical, emotional, and even sexual abuse. Not by family members per se, but it took place. And as I was growing up, that became sort of, I guess, such a shame spot for me that I didn't acknowledge it till much later in life, and I'll get to that later. And then when I was 9 years old, my dad passed away. So we had set up in Oxnard, like I said before, and then my father actually moved to Hawaii, and he was going to get a job, and he actually had gotten a job with the gas company over there on the Big Island, and we were going to move over there. And during his time away, he ended up dying. So we went off to Hawaii and had the body taken to Maui, which is where he was originally from, and where he's buried now.
If you don't mind me asking, what happened?
It was actually, from what I understand, it was some kind of strange type of heart attack. He was actually really young. It might have been some kind of a clot thing, and he was 30.
So a freak accident,
wow.
Yeah,
or a freak, what just happened out of nowhere? Then wow,
it happened out of nowhere.
How was your relationship with him?
He worked a lot, so I mean, I had a lot of respect and love, for my dad. But I always, that was actually one of the things that sort of affected me, is I never felt like I had enough time with him. And some of that, even though I was just a kid, I blamed a lot of that on myself as well, but, the memories I do have, are,
Good.
pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was he like?
But still, you're only 9 years old. I mean, that's not,
Yeah.
it's not very much time.
No. And I remember when my mom got the call, and it was the middle of the night. And she had a friend of hers move in for a time, a lady friend of hers, and they were both just wailing on the phone. And I had never heard wailing like that before in the house, so I kind of knew that somebody had probably died.
Right.
And I didn't have a lot of experience with this. And at the time, I just remember saying, anybody but my dad. Anybody but my dad, please. Anybody but my dad. And then they came in. They could tell that my sister and I had woken up, and they came in and told us and that kind of thing. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was hard. It was, and it was actually one of the things that shaped my life quite a bit.
I was gonna say, what was your feeling, your initial thoughts, or what were you thinking during when your mom told you that?
I remember the first thing I said was I didn't want to do anything anymore. I just wanted to basically shut down. So early signs of depression, right? But
Right. Yeah.
But she came in and told us, your daddy went to heaven. And it was just odd. And then that day, all kinds of people had come to the house. We didn't know everybody.
Right.
And I think a friend of my dad's who I saw that day, never saw again, he took my sister and I to go see E.T. And he essentially, they took us and dropped us off at the theater. And we were like halfway through, the movie was halfway through, and he just said, go ahead and stay through the next one. So that's what we did. And that's how I saw E.T., so I always have that kind of weird correlation. And
Like, I'm never gonna watch E.T. the rest of my life.
Yeah.
it was a great movie. Yeah. So that actually really shaped things. And I had a tendency as a kid to, especially after that, to seek escapism, fantasy, like these types of things, and to some degree, within balance, I still like my little escapes here and there, even today, but
Yeah.
it was definitely something that, that sort of shaped me in a certain way.
That explains your affinity for Star Wars.
My affinity for Star Wars, we actually started at age 4, by the way. My mom took me to the first one. It was 1977.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I see, this is episode 20. And this year I celebrated the 20th anniversary of my 25th birthday.
You going to do that math for us, Isaac? It's 45.
I just don't get it.
It wasn't that funny.
No, my brain doesn't work that well.
No, but actually at age 10, I think I was... Yeah, age 10 was the first time I actually tried alcohol.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty young.
Pretty young. I had
Well,
help.
very young, I should say.
How'd that come about?
I was introduced to our parents' liquor cabinet. Not by my parents, right? Not really,
George, I want to show you something.
right? And it wasn't a regular thing or anything. And then I had, tried smoking here and there and just little ways to escape and rebel and these types of things. But from there kind of started a pattern, and even the escapism, went into food and stuff like this. And from like age, I think 9 until basically I think it was between my sophomore and junior year of high school, I was a fat kid, so I had, those types of issues, rejection issues. There was some bullying in there.
Right.
And this was all stemming from or you were just trying to cope with the loss of your father?
I think that definitely ties into it, but it was essentially, I didn't really fully deal with the loss of my father
Right.
until later, and I'll get to that too. But I sought different ways and means, and I tried different drugs, and I don't necessarily need to go into the details. For me, it's not necessarily about the substance whatsoever. It's about the associated behaviors and the obsessive compulsive nature. So my drug use increased, as I got older.
It was during high school?
It was during high school, but I actually had a brief period in my freshman year. So I had been using this and that in junior high, and when I went to high school and I was in my first year, my freshman year, I had actually kind of walked away from it for a time, and this was also a time where I was on the honor roll a couple of times, so I was, trying to be the proverbial good kid. And
So this was you knowing that you were doing the wrong thing, and
Yes.
then now I want to do the right thing.
Right.
Or that what you're talking about. Well, did God have any play in that, or was there a relationship with God, or does this come?
Interestingly, towards the end of junior high, actually, I was raised in Catholicism.
Okay.
So around that time was my Catholic confirmation. So from that regard, I guess you can say that God had kind of a hand in that as well. And I had other aspirations. I think when I was a freshman in high school, I think I wanted to be a police officer, and so obviously that didn't go with,
Right.
with
that lifestyle.
Yeah. But, and that was age, up through age 14. age 15, I was done with church forever. Never to return. Yada yada. So for what's going to be a Creaster, Christmas and Easter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Creaster attendance.
And
that was just because in your growing older, your learnings, you don't want anything to do with religion kind of thing?
Actually, what happened was, going back to the death of my father, my mother had remarried, and I did not have a good relationship with my stepfather.
Okay.
And he yelled a lot, which actually aided me later when I joined the Marine Corps. I wasn't necessarily as startled by somebody screaming in my face, but
I heard you.
Right. He was actually married to my mom between ages 10 and 15. So at age 15, I really rebelled. I was a stereotype. I was totally, just kind of went where I wanted, did what I wanted. As long as I left a note, I could kind of go and, stay wherever I wanted, that kind of thing. And it wasn't that big of a deal, and I wasn't getting into trouble. So
by the law kind of thing.
Right. By the law.
Yeah.
A couple close calls, but
right.
But nothing that ever got reported or anything. Mm-hmm. And
so they split up.
They did.
Okay.
They did. So my father passed away in 82. My mom remarried in 84.
Okay.
But this guy was basically in our lives since age 10 through age 15.
Right.
Which is at that time in your life, it's a third of your life.
Yeah.
So it's a big chunk of your life.
It was a big chunk of my life.
Impact.
Yeah.
Especially during that's the very formative years of your life. You're really comprehending everything, really understanding more what's going on. You're not just like hanging out anymore like you do when you're a kid. You kind of just absorb everything. From at that age, you can start thinking on your own and really kind of analyzing stuff from your own perspective and really kind of making your own, like you're saying, you were starting to make your own decisions by wanting to rebel.
Well, also part of that rebellion was I was mad at God. And I had been mad at God for a while because, it was that, with the exception of that, whole confirmation thing. But I was upset with God because he had taken my father. Mm-hmm. And then, I had this other father figure, that did not work out well for me. And that just sort of snowballed. And, then I was, decided I was done with church and these types of things. And then around the time also when I was 15, 16, it was the era, so we're talking about, 88, 89. So this was when a lot of the televangelists, were being found out and, exposed. And so that also kind of shaped a lot of my viewpoint.
Thinking like Christians were hypocrites or?
No, precisely. And the thing was, it wasn't that I had anything against Jesus per se. I liked Jesus, and I remember learning as a child that Jesus said, bring the children to me, and that resonated with me. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't a problem with him, but, it was also the thing of like, Jesus is fine, just don't talk about him,
Yeah.
Right. And then also in my teen years, I was idolizing people like, I don't even know if you guys would know who he is. He's been dead for a while. Sam Kinison, a comedian. Yeah. Nice. Ozzy Osbourne.
Okay.
Jack Nicholson. These were like these were my heroes.
Right.
Growing up. So
those comedian, actors, and singers. So that was like kind of like the whole cultural.
Celebrity.
That was your filter for growing up. Okay.
Right. I was in at that time in a lot of heavy metal bands. My favorite band at the time was Anthrax.
They went back that long?
Oh, yeah.
Because they were around, I think we were in high school, right? That was a thing.
I wasn't ever into them, but I know
I just saw it written on the kids' backpacks that they were
Anthrax.
in those metal beads.
They were
those studs.
It was already retro by then.
Oh, okay.
No, well, actually, they're still around. They're still doing shows, but
I just got back for one today.
right. Yeah, as a matter of fact, no. So, as I was finishing high school, I realized that I was turning 18, and my mom, because my father's death, had been getting like Social Security on my behalf, and that was going to be going away. And I started to kind of have an inkling that I might have a problem, and I was looking for an out. And there was a guy from my neighborhood that had joined the Marines, and he was kind of going around the neighborhood talking to guys about it and that kind of thing. And I ended up going and talking to a recruiter, and I was 17 at the time. And the recruiter said, all right, I'll go to your house and, we'll have your parent co-sign. And I still had to finish high school. So now we're in 1990. And
Gulf War.
Right before, right? Or rather, yeah. And Desert Storm started in January of 91 and ended before I finished high school. But I enlisted, and that was going to be my solution. So I was going to join the Marine Corps and just go off and, not be tied, because I thought it was, it was essentially the hood, the neighborhood that was,
Was Oxnard, what was it like? Because I don't think I've ever been there, but isn't it a beach city?
Some of it is.
Okay.
And there is a nicer end of town. And
then agriculture, right?
And there's agriculture there too. There's other elements too, and quite honestly, there was 3 crack houses within walking distance of the house I lived in.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is probably, like we've talked about this, like it's anywhere and everywhere. If you want to find something, you can find it.
No, right. Right.
Let's put that to the test.
Yeah, you guys go and tell me how you did. All right. Oh boy. No, but so I ended up joining the service, and I went off, and eventually during boot camp and stuff, I kind of thought I might have gotten a hold of this thing, because at no point had I had like an urge to drink any alcohol or do anything. They kept us pretty busy. But interestingly, after I got out of boot camp, after having no smoking, no drinking, no anything, and I went home and lit up a cigarette.
First thing you did.
Lit up a cigarette, and after showing off my dress blues a little bit, I went and had a cigarette, and and I was started drinking alcohol, but when I left and went back east, I think that's when my alcoholism kind of really began to flourish, or alcoholism addiction. To me, it's kind of one of the same.
You were stationed in the East Coast?
East of here. I was in Tennessee, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. And when I got out of the service, I barely got out with honorable conditions by the skin of my teeth, because I had been in trouble several times. And
Alcohol related?
Always.
Yeah.
And funny, that's the funny part is, they actually had people like come and talk to me, and like a counselor sit down with me. Do you have an alcohol problem?
No.
Okay. That was pretty much it.
That's the extent of it.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't like I showed up there drunk or anything, but that was pretty much the extent of it. Well, must be something else. And in my mind, I didn't think I was lying, even though, if I really did any soul searching at the time, definitely would have been a lie. But after getting out, I sunk deeper. I'd gone back home, gotten a job, was doing like security, and I ended up ended up ODing at the age of 21.
Wow.
Yeah, and there had actually been one previous to that, but it was my last OD. So my last time drinking and using actually was July 28th, 1994. And so I celebrate my recovery on July 29th.
94.
Yeah, 94. So
So how did that go down? Like, did you just wake up in a hospital, or I don't know?
I woke up after a day and a half coma.
Oh, wow.
And there was a spiritual aspect, which I actually get to share with you guys because I can't usually talk about this in those secular recovery settings. But and this is all part of how I kind of eventually came to the Lord too. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So I had this aunt in Hawaii who, at the time, was probably the strongest Christian in our family.
Mm-hmm.
And she was praying, and she prayed for me. And she said something to me that did not click with me until many years later. Because when I was in this, so-called coma, they had me, I think they had me restrained. But what I saw was myself sort of in like a fetal position with this giant hand reaching around me and crushing me. And it felt like I was being crushed, like the life was being crushed out of me. And what she said was, I was praying for you, and I was praying for you. And she said, Satan had a hold of you, and I told him to let you go, and like this. And
is this her praying knowing that you're in this coma?
I think my mom called her.
And said, this is what's going on.
Like one of the relatives called her, and then she started
praying for you. Okay.
She told me about it after the fact, and of course, it was sort of an after, oh yeah, thank you, Auntie, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I called her years later, and after several years of recovery, because I'd love to tell you guys that I came out of that OD and I gave my life to Jesus, and everything was rosy after that. But but I was 21 years old, and not sure that I was going to. I didn't know what I was doing, so I did go and make an amends to God the way I understood him at the time. So I went into the Catholic Church of my childhood, knelt in front of a crucifix, and cried and told God I was sorry. So I had a concept of God. It wasn't that I ever didn't believe, but I didn't start living it until, much later. So these pieces actually started to fall together. And in the secular settings, there's what I call the spiritual buffet. There's all kinds of different people from all kinds of different creeds and backgrounds and everything. And, it's almost like you could just sort of take what you want.
Pick and choose.
Build
your own little.
Build your own. That's one way to say it. And because those programs preach, a God of your own understanding. So.
Or a higher power.
Or a higher power, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So, so that can leave a lot to interpretation.
Which means because it's not well defined.
No, and it's it's sort of up to each individual,
right?
So, sometimes that can be bad.
Yeah, you need to find your way or your, however you name it, however you build your thing that's going to help you get through recovery or continue on with recovery.
Correct.
Right.
So while I had, I ended up having, many years clean and sober, I still was doing things that I wasn't proud of. I was still doing things that, weren't honoring to God.
Mm-hmm.
And it eventually caught up with me.
But did you know that, though, that it wasn't honoring to God? Or did you even think about that at that time? Because sometimes because I can kind of relate. There was a certain time in my life where the God wasn't even like on the table. I mean, Drew talked about it where he was like invited me to church at one point. I'm like, what? Like you can't even comprehend it. Essentially, that part of this world, and that spiritual part.
So
Sometimes it just doesn't exist.
Right. So I'd respond to that by saying that my concept of God at the time maybe wasn't fine with it, but I wasn't going to be punished or penalized either.
So you did feel some kind of conviction, though.
There was a little bit, but not until but much more later, and I'll get to that part. But we where was I? 2004. Okay, so
Sorry.
no,
I do that.
no, you're good. You're good, man. So I reached a point of crisis, and around 2004, I got out of this relationship, and I was the wounded one in this particular situation, and I was in, several different relationships, and, I just say that from the perspective of I, was probably not mature enough, to be in a relationship for a long time. Mm. And I did work, and this is where, I have a mentor who wasn't in the program, but who directed me towards God. And by that year, I was very much seeking, and I was,
because what you had been doing wasn't working.
Because what I was doing definitely wasn't working, and I was suicidal at one point. Mm. And I hit a patch of depression, and I called out to God, many times. I'd crack open a Bible. There was a guy at work that gave me a Bible. It was this huge study Bible, and I just cracked it open, went to the New Testament, started reading the red letters.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
Started.
It's so funny. I did that when I first was coming to God.
Right.
I just like, what did he say? What did Jesus say? And that's a good, and it's easy to find. You just open the book and you see the red letters.
See red, right. No. Eventually, God was actually working on me in a lot of different ways. So he saved me a few different times, not just once. He certainly saved my life. He pulled me out of the grip of death, literally. Mm-hmm.
What happened?
Because I've actually talked to I actually had one of those doctors that saw me there. Like, I went and saw him in his private practice like a couple years later, and he's like, told them who I was. Like, we still talk about you, because they were actually expecting me to die. They had a priest come in and give me my last rites.
Really?
At that time.
What happened from
when
you OD'd?
Right.
Oh, okay,
right,
okay.
Right. Back then.
When you were in the coma.
Yeah. And then, I guess we'll get back to 2004 in a sec, but I wanted to say that, there was people he put into my life, who were not necessarily believers, who were just, people from like secular recovery, situations, and they came around me, a couple guys in particular, Joe and Craig, saved my bacon several times, stopped me in those early days from making a mistake, and he's put several other people along the way, in my path, and I've also had the opportunity to help others as well. But when I had reached that point where I was in that crisis, God sent. It was interesting because I did a few things. Throughout the years, I've had a lot of different identities, and not all of them were necessarily in God. But I was in a band for a while too, and.
You say too, looking at Drew, because Drew was in a band.
Yes.
Yeah, not to Isaac.
What kind of band? No, I can't even. I have no musical.
Hard rock metal.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Okay.
So, and you were a drummer?
No, I was a singer.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah.
Can we get
I thought you played drums.
Can we get a little demo real quick?
Maybe later. No, so he actually. I was actually doing one of the last shows that I did. And we did it at somebody's house, and I was sort of on this, on this path to, well, I'll get to that. Anyway, he sent two women, and they gave me a business card for a particular church that they went to. Mm. I said, oh, yeah, great, thanks. That kind
Where
of
was
thing.
this at?
This was
Just
actually,
at the show?
It was actually at
okay.
the
party or whatever.
Two women happened to go to church, And one of them knew me as, like, I guess kind of a seeker and that kind of thing. Mm. So didn't think much of it. later that year, I went with my family to Honolulu, and it just so happens that a friend of mine that I had met from Ireland was going to be there, and she, we had been talking about, the things of God also, and she said, well, I'd like you to come check out my church. And it was the Vineyard in Honolulu. Mm-hmm. So I went and checked it out, and they were having it at a school, and it was in a room, and they had coffee in the back. So that was a good thing for George. And
you big coffee drinker?
Big coffee drinker.
Me too. How disappointed are you in that K-Cup right now?
It was doing the job. It's fine.
I was teasing Drew before the show. I was like, Drew, go give me some coffee before you show up. And he goes, we got K-Cups. I'm like,
right.
Yeah, that's not coffee, bro. How dare you?
How dare you?
Sorry.
No, you're good. So I went to this church, and I said, gosh, I wonder if they have one of these in Ventura. And I ended up looking it up, and sure enough, they had one in Ventura. And then later on, I actually found that business card that I hadn't kind of glanced at.
It was that church?
It was to the Ventura Vineyard.
No way.
That's a trip.
Okay.
Holy smokes.
Holy
smokes.
Right? So, and of course, God naturally sent women to get my attention, right? So I went, and I checked out the church, and I went in, and oh gosh, I can't remember what the sermon was on, but they had the coffee. They showed a video clip of the original Superman the movie.
That's funny.
So you're like, yeah,
right.
I like this.
Right.
Were they comparing it to the Moses story?
No, I think they were kind of making a comparison to different heroes, and they were saying Superman was probably one of the most Christ-like so-called heroes, that kind of thing.
One of my theology classes, they compared that. I think the story of Superman actually derives from the story of Exodus and all that stuff. So
and they had excellent teaching, excellent worship, and I felt like I could do this kind of church. So, and come the next year, I think I had a girlfriend at the time or towards the end of that year. It's a big spread. Now I brought her to church a couple of times, and then broke it off with her in the next year. And in these secular recovery settings, my mentor, sponsor, whatever you want to call it, he had kind of talked to me about this, problem that I had with relationships. And he dared me to do something for a few months, and it was actually something pretty simple. It was, hey, don't get in any relationships. Don't flirt with anybody. Don't do this, because and he was explaining to me how a lot of that is just ego feeding. Or in my case, making up for, lost time or past, rejections and these types of things. And so I actually did that. And at the tail end of that, I was well into church. I started actually.
This is at the Vineyard?
Yeah. Yeah. And I started actually, living as a Christian, and I was just anything I could get my hands on as far as reading, just anything of God. I was sucking it up like a sponge. Mm-hmm. And I was taking classes, at the Vineyard, whenever I could. And there was a class that was called, at the time, 201. I think they later called it Discover Your Reach, and it was about exploring spiritual gifts and interests and these types of things. And Jean was teaching the class.
Oh, really?
So
Jean is your wife.
Jean is now my wife. Yeah. So what happened was I hadn't met her yet, and she was up on the stage. This was before the class, and there was a guy named Gary sitting off to the side, and he goes, it's the beautiful Jean Daly. He's so I said, her name's Jean. Okay.
I got that.
Yeah. So I went and started talking to her, and I was helping them put together binders, because I was there actually really early. And I took the class. It was a 5-week class, on Sunday nights. And on the last Sunday, at church that morning, I went and I sat next to her, and we were passing notes back and forth. Seriously, we were passing notes back and forth.
Like elementary school style?
Totally junior high, elementary school.
Check yes or no?
Yeah, she circled yes, by the way. No, actually, I asked her if she wanted to go to coffee after class, and
she said, "I don't date my students."
She wrote, actually, what she wrote was, "Let me think about it." And I kind of nodded, and then a couple seconds later, she said yes.
Nice.
So then, we went on our first date, and came back to drop her off by her car, and we were sitting there talking, and the police came. So
Really?
police came. She saw two people. They saw two people sitting in a car, so they ran my license. So she got to find out if I had a record. And, beautiful thing. Yeah, so I wasn't hauled away, so that was good. And no, so and
how old are you at this time?
32.
That's funny. That's why it's young still, but it's funny to think of like adults, getting rolled up, for parking and stuff,
exactly.
or like sending notes. It's cool, man.
Well, the church is kind of an industrial park, so it's kind of dark anyway.
Someone's there that late. No one else is there.
Just gonna knock at the window. What's going on in there?
Yeah.
Flashlight in the face. Nothing. I swear.
No, really, nothing. Yeah.
So going back though, I know you're going to continue on, but when you got to the vineyard and all these years before of the secular recovery and those things weren't working, it sounds like it was kind of a slow progression as far as giving your life to Jesus. But did it get to a point where you're like, okay, this is the answer. This is what's going to work for me? Or,
well, yes. Well, as far as, I'll backtrack a little bit. To say that the secular recovery programs weren't working would not be quite fair, because they were fulfilling their primary purpose of helping people to be clean and sober.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But that, for me, I needed more as far as, how to live my life and like these types of things. And
right. Okay.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying.
And of course, I had to, get real with who my God is. And that ended up, it ended up sort of working out, and I didn't like stop going to those. I still go to those,
right.
This day.
Yeah.
To this day, but also I'm still also ever growing in my Christian faith, and I actually now, I spend much more time than I have in the past, in prayer and meditation, and just time with God.
It's good.
Just
right.
leaning back, and I need more of it. And I'm kind
Don't
of
we all? Yeah.
I'm kind of a scatterbrain as it is. So this is like, okay, now I'm just going to sit here, and be still, and
Yeah.
And I think that comes with like wisdom and maturity. Like as your relationship grows stronger with God, you begin to realize how much more you need Him, and then
you want to spend more time with Him.
Yeah,
right.
and the more you realize that, the more you want to give to yourself to Him. And
Yeah.
So that makes sense for sure.
Okay. We'll start, not to get us off topic, but I was wondering, because we were talking about in those recovery settings, some people, you pick and choose, and then what we believe, like the ultimate answer, not just for being clean and sober, but being
The purpose,
who we are as God's children, is finding Jesus,
right.
in that way. So
Right. No, and so part of my, or what was also problematic for me in that transition was the fact that I actually did believe certain things, and I had certain concepts of right and wrong, and I had that sort of dichotomy of I believe this, but I'm doing this, and that definitely that wears on you,
Definitely,
no matter
definitely.
who you are. So, so from there, let's see.
So after the cop knocks on the window,
after you guys got caught making out in the dark parking lot.
Oh, we're making out yet, buddy.
you're necking.
This is going on.
Necking. That's that something Lisa would tell you? You guys
something-
necking in there?
It's something Grandma Mary Lou actually would
It
say.
sounded old school. Necking.
Mr. Labriha, this is going on permanent record, so no, we weren't necking at that time.
You said yeah. Let's get to that.
No.
Just kidding.
So we, but it was, I mean, we actually got married relatively fast. Met in April, started dating in May, proposed in September, married in December.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was like right before New Year's, or was it 28?
The 30th of December.
Oh, 30th.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
You,
right.
you were there.
I was there.
You were there. Yeah. So I got married and that,
If you don't mind me asking, what was it about Jean that was different than all these other relationships that you weren't able to maintain or that you just kept on walking away from?
she was profoundly charming.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She'll get that reference too.
Okay. We're like, wait. Okay.
Yeah. No. But she's wonderful. And I got to know her, as we were going through this class and this process, and, I was learning about myself and these types of things. And, what it was about her was, there was just kind of so much substance to her, and I had always, before I met her, I'd seen her several times, and, I was just always impressed by the way she was, praying or worship and stuff like that. I mean, to me, to a newer Christian, it always seemed like, wow, she's like next level. Like these types of things,
I get it for sure.
Yeah. And we got on well, so yeah, but, being married, has also been, a huge blessing. And when she married me, I had a high school education. I had a decent job, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know what I was going to do. We didn't know what I was going to be. And God has definitely opened doors, since I started moving in the direction that I'm currently in right now. And from everything, from we were able to get through school without having go into debt.
Yeah, that's a huge blessing.
Yeah, it was like he provided the right school for me, the right timing. We, I started in school probably for the wrong reasons. I started because I didn't want to be under the thumb of any employer. So I started, in a business degree program, and to meet what they had put out, because the employer at the time actually paid for tuition for a business program. So to honor that, I took an associate's in business, and then I just started paying my own education that way.
Mm-hmm.
But God has He's opened other doors as far as, the master's program I was in, as far as jobs.
What was it that you studied?
Psychology and professional counseling, which is essentially, psychology.
And you went to school knowing that? Because it sounds
At
like
that
you
point,
decided.
after the business.
Well, my wife and I had to have a sit down and talk about it and pray about it, because if I was going to go for psychology, I wouldn't just be able to get a bachelor's in psychology. I would have to go get a master's as well.
Right,
so
right.
this was a bigger commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
you weren't getting that tuition reimbursement from your work. So
At that point.
no,
so that's a
right.
big-
No, but I also still, because of my prior military service, the school actually gave me a discounted rate on my master's. So again, it was the right
What school did you go to?
It was Liberty University.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, that all worked out. And, but even as far as, I could see God in so many different aspects, from like positions I've put in for and gotten, and positions I put in for and didn't get. I could definitely see God there. And it's funny because, like, this was at my other job, but whenever I didn't get a position, there would always be something later that would emerge or happen, or I would end up seeing that. It's just like, that would have been a bad move,
For sure.
And
Were those disappointments at the time?
initially, and then afterwards it was like,
Yeah.
that was probably Yeah, it's probably
Dodged a bullet.
Yeah,
so to
thank
speak.
you, God. Yeah,
Right on.
but even with one of the previous jobs I held, I worked at a local mental hospital which burned in the Thomas fires, and the evening after the fire started, a former colleague of mine called me and said, "Hey, we might have a position for you here at our firm," and I was floored.
Just within a day.
Yeah, it's like I didn't, and I ended up starting there in mid-December, but I didn't share with anybody that I gotten this job because so many of my coworkers were like scrambling and still looking for work. I think some of them still are.
That's horrible. Because
Yeah.
those fires that was a big deal. But you don't think of stuff like that. You just think of people's home possessions, that are
Right.
gone.
Yeah.
But then when businesses burn down, you don't realize like
your livelihood and
yeah,
all that.
that's something I totally overlooked. Wow.
Yeah, and there were and then there were also issues. I didn't have to contend with it, but there were issues with the unemployment. I guess I heard too as well. So it just it ended up being a real hardship for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And God he's taken really, really good care of us. And yeah.
It's awesome.
And so the path you're on in your career in terms of being a therapist or a counselor, do you see that? Is that like kind of how God has shaped you? 'Cause I don't know. I think it takes a special person to get into that field.
Yeah.
And maybe is it your experiences that you've had, or is it just something that you felt like you were called to?
It's a combination of a few different things. So as I was growing up, I've sort of always had this, or at least since I was, like a teenager, people would confide stuff in me, like even total strangers sometimes, like tell me stuff.
We actually had a deep conversation next to the coffee pot. And that was only, I met you, I was like a minute and a half after I met you.
He remembered.
Yeah.
No, but that's sort of always been with me. And then being in recovery and having the opportunity to sponsor other people, which is not therapy, just to make that distinction, yes. But it did give me the opportunity to work with people, and even I think like even before I was for lack of a better term, a believer, I think God was still using me in certain situations to help other people, or like I would feel words come from me that it's like, well,
Where did that come from?
yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think this is in a direction, moving towards how God made me. So, I do believe it's a calling. And I also, I've had different people kind of give me different words on that as well. And I've had some wonderful people pray for me and these types of things. But it's also like the way God redeems, because here I am, a recovering addict, a former depression sufferer, anxiety, I've suffered all these things, and God puts me in a situation where I can work with people
To help them.
who are hurting from all, any number of like different disorders. I've gotten to work with adolescents, who, some of them were maybe a little bit better off than I was, and some of them, not so much. And I've just had opportunity after opportunity of, to work with people, and be able to empathize with them, on a level that maybe somebody wouldn't,
Yeah.
who hasn't seen some of these things.
That's huge.
Yeah.
I could imagine that's everything. That goes a long way when you're sitting across from someone.
Yeah,
Right.
you walk through the fire so you can actually help guide someone through that same fire.
Yeah.
So, tell them how to do it.
Yeah, we don't, as a therapist, you don't necessarily do a lot of self-disclosing per se, but,
Right.
You do it, I think sparingly and, where you feel like it'll benefit, the individual.
Right. But you're also you're at their level, or at least you can put yourself and be at that same level or empathetic in that way.
I'd be the worst therapist. They'd be telling me something. They'd be like, me too. Dude.
So what should we do?
Honestly, I haven't figured this one out yet. Go ahead.
How did you deal with it? Well, I came to see you.
Oh, that's right. My name's on the door.
That's right.
No, yeah, it's great. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and when this will be coming out, what do you see from your perspective? And we kind of talked about this before the show,
Sure.
in terms of the issues with mental health, which is widespread. The idea of people that are suffering through certain things and they don't seek help, or trying to do it on their own, or whatever the case may be. And then you add in the layer of Christianity and belief in God and Jesus, where Jesus is the ultimate counselor and healer and all of that. And where some people put, which I believe that Jesus can heal completely, right? But there is a need for the... just, like we had Richie on, and he's sought help, professional help, and even medication. Where do you see that, or if you could speak to that in some way?
Absolutely. I firmly believe in people reaching out for help, no matter who they are. I know that some folks in our extended Christian family maybe frown upon certain aspects, maybe frown upon medication, or maybe frown upon psychology, even as a whole, or like these types of things. And unless somebody has an MD after their name, I don't think they should be giving out, any kind of medical advice, my personal opinion. But absolutely. And I would encourage anybody with anxiety or depression, or, maybe even something, worse, to reach out for help, because the help is there. And that's the thing, and that's the trap. People get hopeless. They lose their hope, and it's tragic. And the thing is, people think that they can beat an addiction on their own sometimes, and it's just not how we were made. We're made for connection, man.
Right.
I mean, whether you're an addict or whether you're, whether you're not, we're all made for connection. And when, you give enough time, without connection, bad things start to happen.
Right.
But yes, absolutely, for sure. As far as medications go, again, if it's, I believe that if it's doctor prescribed, and I do also, if somebody has alcoholism or addiction, to also be mindful of, drugs that are addictive,
right?
Like these types of things. And sometimes there are alternatives, and it's just really about being honest with your doctor and saying, hey, I have this problem, that kind of thing. And there's, there's so much, there's so many people suffering, who, needlessly,
right.
And some people are dying. And, over the years and, the secular programs I've talked about, I've seen a lot of people die, and it's, in my mind, it's needless. And, the thing is, we got to, we have to swallow our pride.
Right.
But,
yeah. And to your point of, like, we're not made to do this on our own. Like that's how God designed it. Like he made us to interact with each other. He chose to work through people for spreading his word, spreading the gospel. Like, yes, the Holy Spirit, empowers us and gives us the things that we do and say, but he chose to use people. And so on an everyday level, like, we're supposed to be in community with people that we can talk to, confide in, and walk us through. And for those that it might need to look like professional help, it's along the same lines as terms of, talking to another person and getting help.
I think of when Jesus was carrying the cross to Calvary, and Simon helped him. You know, yeah, I mean, he couldn't do it anymore. The centurion called out Simon to come and help him and carry that cross. We can't do this on our own. We're, like Drew just said, we're not made to do it on our own. We're human. You know, we're full of flaws and we're weak, and our strength is in God ultimately. But I think God, like what you were saying, works through people.
He does.
And and we're supposed to do that together. I mean, it's like you're saying, from what I understand, what you're saying is that people are needlessly dying. It's because they're not getting help, correct?
Yeah, because either they're not aware of the help, or maybe even that what might also be called terminal uniqueness. Oh, they can help others, but they can't help me.
I'm different. I'm too far gone. Is that what you said too? The hope, having that hope. You know, if there's no hope, what is there to live for?
Right, and that's actually, I mean, that's sort of my thing as a therapist, is helping people to find the hope if they've lost it
in life.
Because
who are we without purpose and hope? Like, no, we're just breathing.
Exactly.
What is there to live for?
Yeah. But you guys mentioned a couple. You were talking about how God uses people, and I've heard this said before, and it's about sort of being in partnership with God. Your child could come up to you and want to bake a cake with you, right? And you can go and do that with your child. And if you do that task, it's not going to be done efficiently. It's not going to be done, without making a mess. And it's not necessarily about that. It's about the experience of the kid being able to do that with the parent, and that's what it is with God. Yes, he uses people, and yes, sometimes it's messy. And even, to say, some people's best isn't great sometimes, but he certainly, I mean, he does use people, and it's, we get the honor of getting to do that and getting to work with him.
Bake a cake with God. Yeah.
Bake a cake with God.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't. My daughter never comes to me. I always go to her. I say, "Hey, I need some cookies, Stat.
I need some cookies."
My 5-year-old, she can bake. It's crazy.
Really?
Yeah. Kaya will throw down, and it's funny. I'll be like, Kaya, Daddy needs some cookies.
Daddy needs some cookies.
Daddy needs some cookies. So,
go on, Kitchen good. Jedi. All right.
Well, everything comes back to you, Star Wars. All
roads lead to the Force.
Yeah.
No, George, that's good, man. It's really good to know that there's people like you out there and really trying to help the hopeless and reach people who, I mean, like you're saying, are chemically addicted. It's
sure.
a different. That kind of bondage is so much different than, I mean, everybody has their own sufferings, but addiction, I don't know if you're an addiction specialist, but it's just a different beast, and it takes someone to specialize in that because, I mean, I've been there. For me, being intoxicated or having my mind altered, my body, whatever, just being in that state was so hard to get away from. And the freedom I have now that I found through Christ, I was lucky because I wasn't in the depths that some people are. And it sounds like you were, I mean, coming out of a coma, it sounds like you were in that. But the possibilities of through people that are out there to help us and bear that cross with us, and through the strength of God, that we can do this, we can get to this life and have salvation and have eternal life.
Yeah, it is interesting too, because I've spoken with, like even on those secular programs, I've talked to sometimes a couple of, different speakers over the years, and sometimes they'll say something during their pitch that'll say, I wonder if they're a Christian, and, I'm almost always right. Mm-hmm. And like talking to them, and I remember one guy told me in particular, because it can be like sometimes a little, it can maybe seem sometimes a little unwelcoming to be of this particular faith, in some of those rooms sometimes. Mm-hmm. And, I was asking him, like, how'd you deal with that? And he says, well, and he like named the program. He goes, it was actually this secular program that led me to Jesus. So
It's amazing what God will use anything to get you under or back under his fold, as his child.
Absolutely.
I just have one question for you. When you were starting to reach out to God, and you said you were crying out to God, do you remember what you were praying?
Oh man.
Because this is when you were coming out of the depths, right? You're trying to.
Right. No. It was basically crying out in pain, pretty painful experience with the relationship, but also like, I must have said many variations of the sinner's prayer, not sure if it took kind of a thing maybe at the time, and
just surrendering
and, saying, I surrender. And, that was the actual surrender was a process, but yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah. But,
and like you were saying, it's messy. I mean, we're all in process.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if people are thinking that it's like an overnight thing, I mean, it can be, but if you're saying, God help me, and it doesn't happen right away, I mean, just got to keep on opening your heart to God and just keep on asking, and looking for the way he's going to answer, because he'll answer.
Yeah.
He's going to. If you're open and willing to accept that answer is where it can get difficult and confusing.
The thing about addiction too is, you probably hear a lot of songs talking about, breaking chains and these types of things. And the thing is, he absolutely does that.
Christian music though, right? Okay.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
That was a Metallica song.
Oh yeah. No, it was no. But it was essentially the vision I had. I was actually thinking about this morning. Is that, sort of being there on your knees, contrite with God, and he takes these shackles off of us. Mm-hmm. It's up to us to leave them off. It's up to us not to pick up those and put them back on ourselves. You know what I mean?
Because we'll do that.
Yeah.
We can.
Isn't that crazy to think about? That's a good analogy or a good vision, because you do that. You knowingly will do something. You're like,
sure.
And you're essentially
putting
the chains right back on yourself that you were freed from. They fell off. God unlocked them. Mm-hmm. You're freed from that bondage, and then people can tend to go back to that.
Absolutely.
When you put it that way, that's rough. That's rough, especially when you were saying you're seeing people that probably had a chance and then ended up, losing their life over it. It's man.
Yeah, I mean it's horrible, and I mean I've seen people who struggled for years, and then they put a little bit of time together, and then they relapse on whatever their drug of choice was, and they try to go back to whatever dosage they had the previous time, and and it's sad. It happens too often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this show is dedicated to those people and everybody that's hurting.
Yeah.
Everybody that's suffering.
Amen.
That there's hope out there, and God can break and take off those chains, and he can give you the power to not put them back on, but it does take a willingness on our part.
And that's what I love about this show and what God is doing through this show. I mean, as far as the way he's worked in all our guests' lives and having a place where they can talk about it and tell their story about how God redeemed them, how God freed them, broke those chains, released that bondage from them, that there's hope and God is capable, that he can do anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So thank you, Jesus, for that.
Amen. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Uncle George, for being on here, and we really enjoyed what you had to say, and I think there's a lot of good insight, a lot of good that people can gain from. At least we hope and we believe that they will. But without that, we'll probably close this thing out. Isaac,
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Oh, no, thank you, George, for coming in. Thank you to the G Unit.
I'll remind people, as we always do, reach out to us on Facebook and Instagram, the One Story Podcast. If you're listening on iTunes, scroll down and give us a rating and review if you have the time. It just helps and leaves and gives us more visibility on that front, to where like someone else might be listening to another podcast and it will show like recommended shows or shows like this, and ours might pop up, and someone that didn't even hear about this from someone directly might click on it and start spreading the show that way. And not so that we're propped up, but so that these stories that people tell, the story that George just told, that God can use it, and that it highlights how beautiful Jesus is and the things that he can do for us. So if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and do that. And other than that, email us, reach out to us. Like we always say, let us know who you are. If you want to be on the show, we'll get you booked on. Just got to let us know.
And with that, open your eyes, listen closely, soften your heart, and ask God to reveal himself to you.